Welcome to Zoom into Books with award-winning author Lynn Salsi. She is here to read for you today her book, Hurricane, Jamar's Story. And I'm going to hand it over to Lynn now. Take it away, Lynn.
Oh, thank you so much, Kathy. I'm delighted to be here on behalf of Headline Books and, of course, myself, and present to you a book that I'm fond of and maybe my most favorite of all the books I've written, because it really speaks directly to children, their parents, and also to teachers. It's grade-based, especially for kids that are between the ages of 6 and 9. It is a delightful story to read and to give encouragement to children who are as young as 4 who may be in pre-K. The story is based on Jamar, and Jamar, let me show you Jamar. He is a beautiful child, and it's his relationship with his teacher and his relationship with his family. And just like the coronavirus that we have experienced, Jamar sees or hears or knows that a hurricane is coming. And so the entire story is not just a hurricane, but it is based on what happens to a family when something unexpected happens. So this is a wonderful book that can be used as a lesson even during the times when people have unexpected things happen to them that may be tragic. The story actually ends with a happy and educational ending, but I do want to say to you that as a writer, most people think that I'm not just a storyteller, I'm not just a college professor who I teach fiction writing, I teach creative nonfiction, I teach composition, and I also teach what we used to call business English, now called professional writing and academic writing. So as a practitioner of also what I teach, I am most interested in the stories behind the stories that I create. And all of my writing is based on more of an anthropological type of focus. And I recently had someone to come up to me after I explained how I wrote a certain story and said, "Hey, Lynn, you are not just a storyteller, you're an anthropological storyteller, because you're as interested in the source of your material as you are into how the story comes together and is a final story." So, of course, that becomes another story. But let me tell you, this book was a true inspiration, and it was one of those things that happens a moment in time when you're not even thinking about trying to write a book about a young child and his relationship to his teacher, his education, his parents, and other extended family members. I met a young man when I was completing my MFA at Seton Hill University, whose name is Joe Campbell. And when I was on the way out the door, Joe was coming in, and we had the happy circumstance of being in the same committee. And he had a wonderful voice, and voice is very important to me. And the way he related stories to me about his experience being in the Peace Corps, and then after the Peace Corps, he worked with youngsters in Houston, Texas after Katrina. So I started relating to him the experiences I had as a child and as a young adult living in South Carolina, where constantly hurricanes are hitting the coast of Florida, South Carolina, and North Carolina. And in hurricane season, we hear about that all the time. So just in swapping stories back and forth, we became interested in telling the story about how something happened that was unplanned, uneven thought of, out of nowhere, and what the effect it would be on a family. So my story and Joe's story, because we have double billing on this book, our story is about Jamar and his relationship to the sign of the times and also to his parents. And ultimately, people don't believe this, the ending of the story is also true, because when my brother worked for the state newspaper in Columbia, South Carolina, Hurricane Hugo hit the entire state practically with force. It drove all the way into the Piedmont of the state and did a great deal of damage to all of the infrastructure, the schools. It put kids out of school, it put people out of power, terrible loss of life and flooding on the coast of South Carolina, especially Charleston. And my brother was involved in preparing a special edition of the newspaper which covered Hugo, and he mailed me one. I was living in North Carolina at the time, and he said, "You need to see this." I read it at the time, and I put it away, and went after Joe and I spoke, and we decided this boy and this family would be a good thing to create a story on. I picked up the Hugo and read the ending that you will hear today of the story actually happened in Charleston, South Carolina, because I read it in this special edition of the newspaper. And a lot of times teachers particularly love this book because it is based on a primary source. Even news is not generally considered a primary source. It is the voice of a person who is identified telling her story about what happened to her family during Katrina. So it's a great teaching tool, whether you're a parent or whether you are a teacher. So, of course, you can see I'm enthusiastic about the story. I'm enthusiastic about how it's affected my life and what it makes me think of, because I have 2 young grandchildren. Also, I have a young teen grandchild, and then I have 2 younger grandchildren. So having 3 granddaughters, I think about education a great deal, and I do go into schools and do talks for teachers and for students. So now that I've told you how I wrote Hurricane Jamar's story, let me read it to you. So go to the book. Okay, there's the cover, and inside we see that Jamar witnessed some surprising things when a hurricane came through his community. And I do want you to pay attention to the beautiful, fabulous artwork that was done by Ashley Belote, who at the time was Ashley Teets, and now she's Ashley. She has done a beautiful job with the art, and I think you will appreciate that just as much as you appreciate the story, because it relates. So here you see Jamar at home talking to his father, and they are watching television, and basically that's how it opens, and this is the way a lot of kids can relate to the book. So the hurricane has been downgraded to a tropical storm. If you are unprepared, evacuate or move to a shelter, the television weather reporter says, as Pops and I watched from the sofa. So the interesting thing for me is that I was able to create a book in first person, and a lot of people who've read the book really love the first person because it's from the child's point of view. So I do want to point out that from the beginning, he says, as Pops and I watch from the sofa. So this is Jamar speaking. Big Mama rocks back and forth shelling peas, unconcerned that a storm is coming. I slide close to Pops. I know what that means. Our teacher taught us about storms, wind, and floods, and how to be prepared for emergencies. So a lot of people say, now why do you have emergency preparedness in this? Believe it or not, after Superstorm Sandy hit the coast of New Jersey and New York, and we have friends for many years that live in Queens, New York, and stayed in Queens, and we were actually snapped forth during Superstorm Sandy. And I was interested afterwards, educators came forward and said, we have children that are so concerned and upset from the storm that we have to start teaching children about being part of the family preparedness. So later, after the storm had passed and it was not such a big deal on the news, I was watching a morning show, and a woman from a summer camp in somewhere in Queens, New York, during their camp, that was one of the things that they were going to teach, was teaching young kids about being prepared and being part of the family and understanding emergency preparedness. So therefore, knowing that, when I constructed the following dialogue, I had that woman, that unknown person whose name I wish I had written down, saying, the child is saying, I know what that means. Our teacher taught us about storms, wind, and floods, and how to be prepared for emergencies. A tropical storm will bring wind and rain, but nothing like a hurricane. Pop pats my shoulder. We are prepared, and we will help others when it's over. So children always have a question of, well, there's generally a discussion about evacuation, but again, they get confused when they realize that there are some people that stay in place and help others. So he continues, we read about hurricane wind in class. How strong do you think it will be? There will likely be power outages and some flooding. Strong wind drives ocean water on land, Big Mama. Plenty of food, water, and batteries for our radio and flashlights, Pop says. And houses in our community are built to withstand wind. Now go out, play, and I'll phone Uncle Ronnie to help us get things in order. Stay close. Pops may need your help, Mama calls from the kitchen. Okay, I grab my ball and run outside. The sky is clear. I can't believe a storm's coming because there's not even a drop of rain. My friend Yoel across the street holding plywood against a window while his dad hammers it. Let's play catch, I holler. I can't. We're going to Granny's house. Anyway, we won't have school for a few days, and she likes for us to visit. I watch him help stuff in their car. Most of our neighbors are staying. Living on the Atlantic coast means hurricane season is to us what earthquakes are in California, blizzards in New York, and tornadoes in Oklahoma. My teacher says most natural disasters are weather related. Sounds of hammering, the neighbor helps Pops move furniture off of our front porch. They talk about plans for tomorrow. Excuse me, when the storm is over. Still, it's nothing like the usual place where neighbors gather on our porch to talk and play music. The wind lets out a howl, and there's Yoel and Jamar playing. Jamar runs inside. I really want you to pay attention to the art because this art was carefully planned so that the story shows up on the left and students can watch the art come up and it becomes just as important an element as the story. Kathy Teets, who is the publisher, and Ashley below, the artist, and I decided that the art had to support the story completely. And a lot of times when you have a lot of typing or narrative to read, it is much more entertaining that students that you might hold the book up and read to can focus on the art and can discuss it. And then at some point, they can also discuss what their favorite food is. And this is interesting. I got the favorite food and what food is part of the grandmother prepares food that you'll see later. The interesting thing is my dear friend Connie Mason, who is a well-known North Carolina historian and librarian, children's librarian now, I called her and said, I'm writing this book and tell me what you had during a hurricane. And she said they loved the grandmother's or the mother's chicken salad. And they knew, the kids knew when they had to shelter from a hurricane that they never left the coast, regardless, that they would never ever leave, because the family had been entrenched in Morehead City and Carteret County, North Carolina, all their lives, back to generations, that to the 1700s. And but their favorite thing was chicken salad, and they really look forward to it. And I don't think, when I read this book, I think of Connie Mason and the entire Mason family and all of their bravery through hundreds of years of living in violent coastal conditions, and what they must have gone through. And then every time I eat chicken salad, I think of Connie Mason and I think of this book. So when I write, things have a deep meaning, and sometimes the most minute ways. And it does bring back a lot of memories, and is reminiscent of people you know. So the mother talked to the child and said that the neighbor's family had gone only 20 miles away, but they had families meeting there, and they had a different type of viewpoint from leaving, because you'll see that this family, Jamar's family, stays and is part of the link of people that help out during tropical storms or certain weather conditions in the community. So his pops says that they're going to listen to the weather, and everybody does. If you live in the Midwest, you have no idea how much people in the coastal areas, especially the Atlantic coast, I don't know about the Pacific coast, stick to the television 24/7 when they know a hurricane is coming. And they follow it in every news, and they all have emergency radios. So even though I live inland, I still have that habit of keeping up with all of my friends who live on the coast, and the fact that I one time lived directly on the coast because I lived in Florida, and then my time in South Carolina, I was often in the path of a hurricane. So they listen to the weather, and the papa says, yesterday it was a Cat 1, now it's losing strength and is a tropical storm. That's good news. I helped set up a shelter at school for people who need help, Uncle Ronnie says as he comes in and sits at the table. I'll help you and stay over tonight. I hope there won't be flooding, Mama says. It creates a mess. There's always some in low areas, Big Mama says. Even if water reaches our first floor, we'll be safe, Pop says. Jamar helped me put plenty of water and food upstairs. I help Big Mama wash and dry dishes. Pops rolls up the blue rug. Now, Jamar, unplug everything and put chairs on the counter. Uncle Ronnie helps put the lawnmower on the table. The lawnmower belongs in the shed, I say. It's new. Our garden shed won't stand a chance if the wind reaches 75 miles per hour, Pop says. And interestingly enough, that's also true. People who lived on the Outer Banks of North Carolina had often the islands would go underwater, and people would go to their second story if they didn't leave the island altogether. And a colleague of mine has a photograph of the lawnmower, or a lawnmower, and it being put on the kitchen table because they felt like a hurricane or knew a hurricane was coming. So that's something from history and relates what people really did. And I get asked about that a lot. It's new. Our garden shed won't stand a chance if the wind reaches 75 miles an hour, Pop says. Take this upstairs. Mama hands me a box of candles. While you're there, fill the bathtub with water. We may need it for washing hands and flushing the toilet. And that's what everyone does who lives on the coast. If they're going to stay home and there's going to be a bit, what would not even be a tropical storm, but a really big storm coming that could cause trees to go down or any flooding at all, they're going to fill their bathtubs with water. Upstairs, piles of pillows and blankets nearly cover the bed. Family photo albums, usually on the living room shelf, are stacked on the chest. Mama always gathers her favorite things when she's there. There's a storm warning, which often comes during hurricane seasons. Pop's saxophone, his cherished possession, rests on a stool. He and Uncle Ronnie perform it at festivals. They're teaching me to play, but I still like to play my harmonica. I pat my pocket, making sure it's there. Jamar, be sure the windows are closed, then come down and help us lock the hurricane shutters. Uncle Ronnie calls. I check them, I check the windows and run downstairs. And there you see the child looking out the window. Jamar is looking out and he is being sure that the windows are closed. No windows are open in the upstairs. Hurry, Mama opens the door and calls. The weather radio sounding a warning and announcing shelter or who don't have water and food. Big Mama doesn't seem worried, but my heart beats in my throat as I check things off the hurricane preparedness list we received at school. Let's hope our cars don't go underwater like in Camille, Big Mama says. Who's Camille? I ask. A hurricane when I was only a tiny baby, Pop says. We sat up all night, but we came through just fine, Big Mama says. I fall asleep on the sofa, listening to adults talk about past storms they remember. And that is also true if you live on the coast. People will sit around on the front porch, even when there's not a storm, and talk about, I remember whatever storm it was. Howling wind and rain wakes me. We're getting a strong gale, Pop says. It'll soon take down power lines. Now's the time to get comfortable upstairs, Mama says. I crawl on the bed and nearly bury myself in pillows. Mama gets quiet. I hope working. Big Mama leans back in her chair. She looks calm as she prays. And I might have been too quick there because there's Jamar and there's his mother and his grandmother. They're the family all together and they're all busy supporting one another and getting things together for their comfort. When the electricity goes out, Mama lights 2 candles. Take one to Pop's. We'll save batteries and use flashlights only when needed. As I walk to the other bedroom, I watch the candle flame dance on the hall walls. Spooky, I say to myself. Uncle Ronnie and Pops have an old kerosene lamp glowing. Cool, here's a candle. Mama wants us to save batteries and fuel. You're just in time, Pop says. Ronnie and I are about to jam. Hurricane jam, I pull out my harmonica. Music will take our minds off things, Uncle Ronnie says. We play with feeling, even as sweat pours down our cheeks from lack of air conditioning. A loud noise causes Pop to grab a flashlight and go downstairs. Come here, he calls. Mama, Uncle Ronnie, and I look down the stairs and see Pop standing in ankle-deep water. Oh, not good, Uncle Ronnie says. Means our neighborhood has flooded. I was hoping not to have water in the house, Mama says. We'll keep our fingers crossed that we don't lose roof shingles, Uncle Ronnie says. Heavy rains means this is more than our usual frog strangler. And so that is sort of a colloquial term that people that live in small communities on the coast, especially in the South, have titles or names or nicknames for whatever type of rain is coming. At dawn, slivers of light shine through cracks in the shutters and Pop peeps out. Wow, our street's flooded. Let's get a better look. He opens the trap door in the closet ceiling and we squeeze through into the attic. Birds perch in the rafters taking shelter. Lucky they're here, Uncle Ronnie says. Mosquitoes and other insects carry diseases and breed in standing water, infecting people. Pop stands on an old wooden box to look out the gable opening. This is like the flood in the Bible. We need Noah's Ark. It'll soon subside, Uncle Ronnie says. Water flows out when the tide goes out. Let's stay put while the rain passes over. That'll give us time to be sure the wind won't reverse and come back. And that's Uncle Ronnie looking out the window to observe what's happening with a flood. We go back down. Pops and Uncle Ronnie open the shutters, allowing in air and light. While we wait, let's play music. Pops hands me his sacks, and I blow the only tune I know when the Saints go marching in. Mama and Big Mama smile and applaud, and Pop pats me on the back. Soon Pop lets me crawl back into the attic, my favorite place to play with Yoel, and I look out the window. And so here he is in the attic looking out the window, and he still has the saxophone, and we can actually have a new story, which I sometimes do with students because they ask me about this, and I tell them this is their opportunity to even add to the story, to say what they think he was doing in the attic, because he probably had some toys up there too. And I watch roofs, advertising signs, garbage, lumber, tree limbs, and parts of our garden shed float by as the water flows toward Core Sound. Core Sound is near where my friend Connie Mason lives, and there are people who live in North Carolina that will see my allusion to North Carolina there, because that's what happens a lot when the southern Outer Banks and the Outer Banks flood. Interestingly, when you look out the window after a flood or a strong rain, you do see all sorts of things float by. And that gives you an idea that if you're ever in an area that floods, you do not want to go wading in flood water, because it's generally flowing, and if it's on the coast, it's going to be flowing perhaps toward a sound, or it's going to be flowing toward a place that's more shallow. And even a few inches of water, especially if a child is trying to wade in it, it'll make you fall over, cause you to fall over. It can take you with a sort of current, and also you never know what is floating there. It could be bits of glass or metal. It could be dangerous. So this is another conversation we have when I'm doing presentations with students, talking about what they see. That flood water is so powerful. You can see there that Ashley even has the tree limb, the tire, the shutter from the house, and in the distance, a car. So all of the art in this book can create an intense conversation with students, so they can add their own ideas, and they can actually write stories from this story. So Mr. Anders and others are out in boats checking on neighbors. They yell, "Hello, hello, is anybody home?" Our next door neighbor waves from his second floor window. "We're fine," he says. So about that time, Big Mama calls and says, "And jelly sandwiches." Jamar says, "I climbed down and washed my hands in bathtub water." Big Mama and Mama put out cereal bars, apples, sandwiches, Vienna sausage, and bottled water. And I'm always thinking secretly, and the sandwiches are chicken salad. Thank you, Connie Mason. While adults talk about what they'll do next, I wish I had a glass of lemonade with ice and wonder what my friends are doing. And so this is another conversation to have with students. Say, if you were Jamar, what do you think your friends would be doing? And believe me, even if they're 6 years old, they'll tell you everything they would be doing. And then you have to prompt them and say, you don't have electricity. So what would you be doing without electricity? So it's a fun conversation. Soon we hear footsteps on our front porch, and Mr. Anders yells, "Hello, hello, are you home? The Moores need our help." Mama Pops, Uncle Ronnie, and I get into Mr. Anders' boat. He paddles us through the flood water to the Moores. We rush into their house and see a dolphin trapped in a few inches of water in their living room. "Thank goodness you're here," Mrs. Moore says. "The tide swept him in, but he's still alive." "We need your help to move him," Mr. Moore says. "He's at least 5 feet long," Pop says. "Think of what he must weigh," Uncle Ronnie adds. "We need to carry him," Mama says. "Anything flat will do." "I'll look outside," Mr. Anders said. he returns with a door unhinged from a shed by the storm. Now, to get him on it, Pop says, he's slippery. I look around. How about a curtain? I point to blue draperies. And so there you are. Jamar, who's only 7 or 8 years old, has a suggestion, and the neighbor, Mrs. Moore, jerks one down and says, perfect. So as adults carry the dolphin, and so obviously we have a really good and close picture of the dolphin, but as adults carry the dolphin, I walk along beside him and talk softly. Poor thing, don't worry, we'll get you back to your family. And then, of course, if you're a teacher or a parent, you can have a Stand by Dolphin book and talk about how the dolphin could have survived in just a few inches of water in someone's living room. One, he stayed wet, and you can talk about that because this is something that really happened after Hurricane Hugo, and the dolphin survived. Outside, it's odd not to see people playing ball and sunning themselves nearly to the water. Run over and help lower the door into the water. And right here you see when students and young children are faced with things that suddenly happen. And for instance, during the virus epidemic, students were wondering why so few people are outside, but yet there are people around that are helping. So in this story, they have people out helping with the aftermath, helping with the cleanup, and there's not enough room in a children's book to tell about all the people who are out there. And we certainly want to pay tribute to the power companies, because power company employees come from all over the United States to help in coastal areas when the power is out due to flooding, high wind. It doesn't have to be a hurricane. Many, many things cause that. So Jamar looks down. He sees the dolphin floating, but he's not moving. Everyone just stops and watches the dolphin. We watch and hope. Suddenly he swims around me and swims away. We watch him swim out of sight. I can't wait to tell my teacher and all of my friends the best thing that's ever happened after a storm. Now, why did I end it like that? Because teachers in lower grades try to engage students in narrative. And so whether you're a parent or you are a teacher and you're working with the book, there's an opportunity to say to a student, well, what did you do? What do you remember about a circumstance? And students will tell you, and it becomes their story. And in this digital age, it's easy to create a multi-modality, taking modals and putting them together and creating multiples. You can put a child telling a story on video. They don't often have to just write everything. And of course, I know that a lot of kindergarten teachers work with children, asking them to tell about certain events or tell about something they are thinking about, and the teacher writes it down, and sometimes the student comes back and creates illustrations. So the very end, I could not get all information I'd like to get onto the very last page, because it's a children's picture book. You're limited with pages. But I did include natural disaster and hurricane facts, and talk about the National Hurricane Center, which is you can go online, teachers, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, the National Hurricane Center at NOAA, and they sponsor a hurricane preparedness week every May as a way to remind coastal residents that hurricane season is approaching. And that's one way in coastal areas where there are hurricanes, businesses will put out brochures. I've even been in fast food businesses in areas where hurricanes are prominent in May and June of each year. They may even have a map that shows where hurricanes have hit recently or may have hit, and also they will give a list on how to prepare. So if you'll notice at the bottom of the page, I had just basic lesson so people can see what a lot of students learn in school when they study earth science. And it's valuable for students to learn how to be part of the preparedness of their family. And it's important for families to be aware that even young children need to be part of the preparedness regime, because when and if something happens, the child student is part of the plan, part of the solution, and generally is more emotionally prepared than they would be if the parents are running around doing everything. This book was a joy for me to write. It took a long time to write it because Joe and I were going back and forth, basically doing it online, which can happen, and it's difficult sometimes when you collaborate. And also, if any of you are out there learning to write, you're learning about writing picture books, the concept of compression is so important. And that's when the art plays such an important part, because you can't express every single thing that's on your mind as a writer. And some of that I explained, and I hope that I was able to relate to you how the story relates to the art. And again, if you are interested in purchasing the book, headline books, I think at this point in time, Amazon is being slow. It's generally available also on Amazon, but if you order from Headline Books, you get free postage, and you can also get a signed book through Headline. So let's hear from you, and if you have any questions, please feel free to contact Headline Books. They know where to find me, and I am highly available online. See a lot of things. I'm usually known in the children's world for writing jack tales and storytelling because I like to put all the stories in the context of history, and I do a lot of school presentations and school talks and talking about how important mythology and folk tales, fairy tales, and all of those sorts of things are. And I put the same emphasis in that type of thing in my type of writing, even if they're handed down stories from centuries. I put the history within the context the same way I attempted to do here in putting true facts, and as well as how important it is to include students and children in decisions. Thank you for watching, and I think I'm going to be again on Thursday, and I will be telling a jack tale and talking all about the jack tales. Thank you very much.